Rhode Island Clam Shacks, so Images of America, Rhode Island Clam Shacks, and it's co-authored by Christopher Martin and David Stone. I'd like to introduce David to the show. How are you
Hi,
doing?
Molly. Great. How are you?
So good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us in the Navigant Credit Union
Thank you very much.
Broadcast Center. So I've been looking through this book. Love these Images of America books.
Yes.
They're so fantastic. You both have done a beautiful job putting this together. Just tell me a little bit about kind of how you got started on this and why you feel like you're an expert on all things
sure.
clam shacks.
Well, first of all, this is a book that I always wish I existed. There has never been a book that's only about Rhode Island clam shacks. There have been some about New England clam shacks that might mention one or two Rhode Island places. There have been Images of America books about Rocky Point or Crescent Park, but nothing that gave a statewide view of how clam shacks developed here, from starting with clam bakes, moving on to shore dinner halls, and then the clam shacks we all know and love today. As far as how I became an expert in the topic, it's through eating, mainly.
Tough job,
yes,
right?
I'm a Rhode Island native, first of all, so I was practically weaned on clams. I remember my first clam cake that I had at Scarborough Beach when I was about 3 years old. And
what a great memory, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can all just think about those kind of memories.
That's right. My mother told me it was like a French fry. It was something fried that I would like it. And I liked it so much, I wrote the first book about clam cakes about 5 years ago that's called Clam Cake Summer. And it was about the subtitle was "One Man Eats Every Clam Cake in Rhode Island or Dies Frying." And,
dies frying. That's awesome.
And it was really, I literally did go out not only to all the clam shacks, but also to summer fairs like the Wickford Art Festival, May breakfast like the one at Oak Lawn Baptist Church, where their clam cakes were only served once a year. And I had a strong memory of Rocky Point clam cakes because I had actually worked there.
Oh, okay.
As a college student. So, and by the way, I brought you from my personal collection a Rocky Point clam cake bag.
This is awesome!
It's vintage.
This is for me?
It's for you.
Oh, this is so great. Thank you.
I wish I could fill it with Rocky Point clam cakes because
this is so cool.
We all wish we could have those.
This is so. It's so neat and to talk about the history of this kind of stuff. I'm such a history buff, and it's so neat to be able to go to Rocky Point and see kind of where things were. And I unfortunately never got to experience Rocky Point in its full glory, but there's this just kind of obscure documentary that my husband bought thinking it was all about Rocky Point and all the fun, but it turns out it was just this random haunted, spooky Rocky Point.
Oh, okay.
That a local filmmaker did. This is kind of off topic, but I got to see the rides and kind of Rocky Point in all its glory. So it's kind of neat that you're able to look in the history of it.
One thing I learned in writing the book is that Rhode Island has been famous for clams for almost 200 years, and it's been driving tourism here for 2 centuries. And it really started with Rocky Point. It was one of the first places that steamships used to take people for clam bakes.
Oh my gosh.
And then after that, they built a shore dinner hall, and people started going there for outings and parties or just for a Sunday dinner. And so we actually trace all 4 shore dinner halls that were at Rocky Point over the years. And it was funny. It was such sort of hubris in a way, because one would get destroyed by a hurricane, and then they'd build another one even further into the water, which would get destroyed by a hurricane. Finally, they had the good sense to move one back a little bit closer to land on a hill, which is the one most people remember today.
And just talking a little bit about that, people are so ingrained in their memories from when they were a kid, and so ingrained. And you go back even farther. So some of the images in here are just so memorable. You're looking, people will flip through and say "Oh, I remember this. I remember that." Talking just a little bit about the shore dinners and. Take me through some of what you found, some of the stories that kind of stood out when you were going through and doing some of your research.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, it's a book that would not have existed without the help of a lot of very passionate people throughout the state. So mainly the owners of the clam shacks. We worked with the owners of Aunt Carrie's, the Hitching Post, and learned about their family Thanksgiving spent in the restaurant, the type of stories that you wouldn't know without really talking to them. Places like Aunt Carrie's, which is going to be 100 years old soon,
Oh my gosh.
have such a history. They're
Oh, look, yeah, here's a picture. Aunt Carrie's.
yes, right. It was a gas station. Well, if it was like a gas station, a campground, a clam shack, it started actually just as a lemonade stand near the Point Judith Lighthouse. Then also, and Aunt Carrie also served her clam cakes there. And I credit her with inventing the modern clam shack because it literally was nothing but a shack, and it was clam cakes and lemonade. Eventually, they moved to the location people know now, which is also right in Point Judith. And a lot of people credit Aunt Carrie with inventing the clam cake. I don't think she did that because I know they were serving them at Rocky Point and some of the short dinner halls back in like the 1860s and 70s before she was even born. But she certainly perfected the clam cake. So we learned sort of the secret behind that, which is that they're fried in lard, which gives them a very distinct taste, and they're enormous. They're huge if you've ever had one.
Oh, geez, they are. They're giant.
We also learned some really interesting facts. Like originally they were called clam fritters at Aunt Carrie's. Most people today know them as clam cakes, but they really were called fritters in Rhode Island even. And they were, they were, I think it was very unique just to serve that as a pairing with, chowder. Like in Massachusetts, clam shacks really are built around fried clams. But in Rhode Island, I think any clam shack, even or chowder house, is going to always just have clam cakes and chowder. That's like the core of our summer cuisine.
And you can't really find them anyplace else. We've been to Massachusetts, been to Maine, been to other places,
That's
and it's
right.
like you can't find clam cakes. It's like you're craving it and you just can't find it anywhere else. Are clam cakes really just a Rhode Island staple? Is that something that it's ingrained in our...
Absolutely, and one of many, because we have so many foods that really aren't known elsewhere, from coffee syrup, our passion for iced coffee and coffee milk that's in our baby bottles practically.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique thing about Rhode Island, and and I think clam cakes are, there was a competition not too long ago to name the official state appetizer, and I think calamari actually won, but in the hearts of people, I think the clam cake is the official state appetizer.
It's so true. And just looking through these pictures and seeing the history and seeing some of them, did you have a favorite photo in some of these? I was looking and you said over 200 vintage photos.
Yeah.
Did any really one of them stand out, or were you kind of captured by any of these?
Well, first of all, I love any photograph that had food in it.
Yeah.
Because believe it or not, that's one of the hardest things to find. This book has pictures going back to like the 1860s. People in those days didn't have iPhones, at the short dinner hall to take pictures of their
there was
meal.
no Instagram then.
And I don't know, I think they had higher priorities for their photographs. So
that's true.
So when I can find a photo of food, I'm thrilled. We've got some wonderful postcards in there from Georges of Galilee with their full fisherman's dinner. But one of my favorite photos is one of Aunt Carrie, who I was speaking about earlier. She and her husband, Ulysses, who was called Uncle Lys, there's a photo of them with Governor John Roberts at a table at a clam bake at their restaurant. Ulysses, Carrie's husband, was in the House of Representatives for Rhode Island. He was a Republican, and he was the most popular man in Rhode Island politics because every summer, he had all the State House down to Aunt Carrie's for a clam bake. So this photo was obviously taken one of those days, and it shows how, we can be divided by politics or other things, but clams and love for the clam is something that brings us all together here.
The love for the clam, right? And you had mentioned before too that it wasn't always about the quahog. It wasn't always about that. It was about something else. So, what else did you learn going into this book?
That is a good point. Rhode Island's always been famous for the clam, and you can go back to like Harper's Weekly from the 1870s and find all these really funny accounts of people coming to Rocky Point or other places in the state for a clam bake and encountering a clam. for the first time. But it was a different clam. It wasn't the quahog. Rhode Island was really known for its steamer clams. And unfortunately, because of pollution and hurricanes, the big hurricane from 34, the steamer kind of disappeared from Rhode Island shores and has never really come back. So I think people had to turn to another product, and they discovered how adaptable the quahog was. Even though none of us pronounce it in quite the same way.
Well, that's also so Rhode Island, right?
Yes, right. We all love the quahog, and it's become famous on Family Guy and so forth now. So that was one of the really interesting things that I learned was, I always assumed it was always the quahog that was in the Rocky Point clam bake, for example, but it really wasn't. Another kind of controversial thing we learned was that people think red chowder is Manhattan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this could be a big debate, too. Like,
yes,
which chowder is the best?
Right. A lot of people remember, like, the kind of red chowder that you don't remember it, but there was a red chowder at Rocky Point that I think was by far the most popular there. I think they had white as well. And I think it was more like an orange chowder, actually. But we found that this actually started at one of the shore dinner halls in Providence. It was a place called Fields Point. And the person who owned and managed that started to add puree to his chowder during the clam bakes there. So, people think of clear chowder, or plain chowder as being the classic Rhode Island, and we only ever had clear chowder. But, from like the 1870s onward, red chowder was very popular here.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to go through telling this story through pictures? Do you think that really gave it the best voice to be able to tell this? Or do you think if people are more interested in pictures now, they hold the attention span better? Why did you decide
to well, that's interesting because when I wrote Clam Cake Summer, and I had two follow-ups, one book about stuffies called Stuffy Summer, another about chowder called Chowder Summer, I found out a lot of people were not from around here. They were buying them really across the world. And they really wished there were pictures because they didn't know what I was talking about.
They had no idea what that meant.
They thought a clam cake was like a crab cake. So I think a book like this is fantastic because, it's a visual aid to people. It gives them a sense not only of what the food looked like, but also of the, of the environment in which it was served. Another really fantastic thing is that by using images, it forced us to go out and really talk to people. So we went to private collections, like a guy who had fantastic stuff from Crescent Park.
So fun.
Places, closed clam shacks like Mrs. Gus's in Oakland Beach. He gave us a bunch of stuff going back to like the 20s and 30s from there. It got us out in the community. We spent about a year writing the book, and every weekend was full of, a visit to a different archive or collector. And, I think it made a better and stronger book. And it also allows us to put faces on a lot of the history, so now we have like the names of people who were making clam cakes, the chefs, the kind of anonymous chefs behind the, kitchen wall. It was a different era back then.
Definitely.
To be able to find the names of some of those people, and in some cases the images, has been amazing. And then there are exciting pictures because hurricanes and fires have claimed so many, clam shacks because part of their glory is that they're right on the ocean. So we have a lot of pictures. We have one of Ballard's Inn that burned to the ground in, I think, 1986 that Steve Philippi gave us. That is, all it is smoldering flames, and it's amazing how quickly, they had that place rebuilt. So we have several images like that of the kind of disasters that have hit.
Well, and I even remember just a couple years ago there was a clam shack somewhere that caught on fire. It just seems like this just happened.
Well, and it's funny, clam shacks are always in the news. There's always something. It's such a big part of our state. One kind of funny story in retrospect was last year when a person got stuck between the rocks in Point Judith. I don't know if you heard this story, but he. A fireman remembered seeing a method where someone had gotten stuck and they used cooking oil to get them out. So they ran to Aunt Carrie's and
That's
got their
amazing.
used cooking oil, and it actually helped free this person from the rocks before the tide came in. It was a lifesaver. So, it's a rich
That's
topic
amazing.
because there's always a story like that on the horizon.
Oh, that's so fantastic. All right, well, David, I'm going to swap you out and bring in your other co-author.
Okay.
So it was such a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we're going to speak with your co-author for a few moments, and thank you so much. This is fantastic. I
All right,
absolutely
enjoy.
love this. So thank you so much,
Take care.
David Stone, one of the authors of Images in America, Rhode Island Clam Shack. So I'd like to bring in Christopher Martin. Come on in.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So nice to see you. So you are the other co-author, and you're also you also run the website cohog.org, which
Yes.
I may or may not be saying right. I just learned from your co-author right there. So tell me a little bit about, you authored the sections about clam bakes. Talk to me a little bit about just how clam bakes are so ingrained in our culture here in Rhode Island and New England.
Well, it's one of the most fundamental cuisines, and cuisine styles in Rhode Island. I mean, it's there's nothing more fundamental than going out and digging up your own clams and cooking them on the beach and eating them right there. So a clam bake is it can be anything from just that one person digging up clams on the beach and eating them there, to a large group of people, thousands, enjoying a clam bake. And there's a whole ritual involved in those large clam bakes in terms of how it's put together, how it's enjoyed. I don't know if you want to go into all the details of how that's put together.
No, I'm just kind of wondering also, because so many of us and have enjoyed clam bakes so often here in Rhode Island. What's one thing that really stood out to you that you learned that you thought was so fun or so interesting as you were putting together this book?
One thing. There were a lot of things. A lot of details. We talked extensively with a historian named Henry A.L. Brown in Warwick, and he was a bake master back in the 70s and 80s. He told us a lot about how he would put together a clam bake. One of the things I thought was fun was the fact that he always wore a top hat when he was cooking, I guess to identify himself as the bake master. Unfortunately, the picture we got of him, he is not wearing it, but he would. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But was there any other images that you did get that really stood out? I mean, there's one we were just talking about, the fires and the hurricanes, and here's a picture, of Skip's dock being on
had
fire.
a fire in '97. Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many images in here that.
Skip's dock has had a lot of disasters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from just hurricanes, blizzards, that fire. These things. I mean, they've been around since the 20s, and they're still going. And we included them. I mean, they're basically a market, a seafood market. They've been a seafood market since the 20s.
Yeah.
But only in the past 5 years or so, they've started to sell prepared foods. So they're on the evolutionary scale. They're turning into a clam shack. And that's actually one of the things I found was really interesting about what we researched here was the evolution. I mean, we start off with clam bakes. People going out on the bay, finding a spot on an island or a peninsula, having a clam bake, just a fun day out. They would do it, start doing it regularly. Then you'd have a club form. Then they would build a building or maybe a pavilion to have the clam bakes. Then they'd build a bigger building, and it would evolve. It would become, and then the shore resorts started coming, and they built the piers, and the steamboats came down, and they built short dinner halls for that. But they all still had clam bakes. And then after pretty much around the hurricane of '38, which wiped out a lot of stuff, things started evolving into clam shacks, from the short dinner halls to clam shacks. So. A lot of markets have evolved from markets into clam shacks. So I find that interesting. The way the business has changed from just sort of a leisure time activity into a business and into different kinds of businesses. Like George's of Galilee started off as a small lunchroom. Now it's a big resort-style restaurant. It's one of the biggest restaurants in the state. So that's one thing I find really interesting is the evolution.
And to see that throughout the state, all these different dynamics, and see how they've grown and changed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been so fascinating to speak with the both of you. If you are interested in the book Rhode Island Clam Shack, Images of America Rhode Island Clam Shack, what's the best place people get it online at bookstores?
Amazon, it's available, and I believe it's at most local restaurants, most local bookstores, Barnes and Noble, and places like that.
Fantastic.
So it's available.
Agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christopher. I really appreciate it. If you're interested, you can check that out. And if you are interested in any clam shacks, do you have a favorite place?
The next place I'm going, wherever I'm going next, that's my favorite.
I like that answer. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.